Native Affairs Minister, also one of the few Anglophone MNAs at the National Assembly. Thank you for joining us this morning.
It's a pleasure.
I want to talk about the controversy, the allegations in Val-d'Or. Before we get to what your government announced this week on Wednesday, I do want to take it back just a bit to when you found out about this, and tell me about your initial reaction to the shocking news that we all heard.
Well, as it turned out, the evening that the show was on television, I was up north. I was in Radisson and then at the Raglan mine at the very top of Quebec. So it wasn't until Saturday morning that I sat down at home and watched it online. And it was deeply shocking because what we learned in that show, these are deeply troubling allegations. So I was pleased that we've put it in the hands of another police force to do the investigation. Measures have been taken, but it reminded us once again that there are just far too many vulnerable Native women in our society in Quebec and Canada. There have been repeated calls for a national inquiry into missing and murdered Aboriginal women, and this is all part of a fact that there are just many, many Native women in our society who are unfortunately very vulnerable. And
First Nations women have said throughout this whole affair that this is not just an issue in Val-d'Or. What do you say about that and you know, other allegations throughout the province?
Well, I mean, obviously it's something of great concern. First and foremost, we have to separate out, there's a criminal investigation because there's certain specific charges against specific individuals. As a minister, I have to be careful not to comment beyond the fact that that investigation is ongoing. We're very pleased that we've named an independent observer, someone with an impressive international record on human rights, Fanny Lafontaine, who's going to follow the inquiry. So we'll leave that on one side. But as I say, repeatedly, the First Nations organizations and the provincial governments have called on the federal government to have this inquiry. I hope it'll look beyond just the question of missing and murdered Native women, but the whole difficult question of the relationship between the First Nations and the police. British Columbia just finished doing a study, Saskatchewan's done a study, but it's obviously a pan-Canadian phenomenon, and I think we need to look at it.
You mentioned Fanny Lafontaine. How important for you was it that a woman be named to this case?
Well, I insisted. I mean, there were a number of names. We went back and forth. It's a very difficult mandate, so there wasn't a long lineup of people willing to do it. So I've never met Madame Lafontaine, but I'm very pleased that she's accepted this mandate because it's going to be a difficult one. These are very emotional issues. So to have someone of her caliber say yes, I think was very, very encouraging. She's going to reach out and have an advisor for her from the First Nations. So I think they'll make a very good pair working together.
Do you have any regrets now, knowing what you know now, over how this has been handled by the government?
Well, regret takes you nowhere. I can only move forward. So, and as I say, there were some signals earlier this year. But until I saw the show, until you see the testimony, I still think there was a great gap there. But my priority is to move forward. The series of announcements we made on Wednesday with the Premier, I insisted that first and foremost we put things on the ground right away. Something that I can see that isn't here today that will be there tomorrow.
And those initiatives, again, a very lengthy meeting, by the way, on Wednesday, a 2-hour meeting. Tell us about the $6 million that's being spent. Obviously, a time of austerity in Quebec where we're going to spend money in this. Why was that important?
Well, I think first, there was a pilot project last winter of a day center for itinerant homeless people in the streets of Val-d'Or. So we found the funding to make that on a permanent basis. I think it's important because it means there'll be someplace to go when it's minus 30 and have a cup of coffee, and maybe sit down and talk to the counselor, maybe sit down and talk to the social worker. So that's the first step. There was a project that was being studied by the Quebec Housing Corporation to build 24 units for Native women who are without the means, so a subsidized housing. So those women will get, that project will go forward, partnership with the city of Val-d'Or and others. And then third, sort of the eye of the storm has been the Native Friendship Center. So there are increased resources for them in terms of not just social workers and counselors, but legal counsel and other people. There's a system in Quebec, CAVACs, which are to help the victims of criminal acts, so they're going to be put into contribution as well. So it's a first round of measures really to protect and to help the women who we're talking about in this very difficult situation.
We don't have much time left, but I do want to talk about quickly about building confidence, building trust. I think, you know, that's been broken in Val-d'Or, between the police and people in that area. How do you rebuild that?
Well, at first we've proposed a task force. We'll sit down and work with the police forces, because it's the SQ that's under the focus today, but there are other police forces as well. Look at that to lead to some form of a political summit Secondly, what the Premier said is we'll look at the mandate we're going to give to the National and the Canadian Enquirer. If it's insufficient, we'll look at other ways to get to the bottom of this. But it's very important. You have to have faith in your police force. We need police forces in our society. And I've always said, you know, being a police officer at 2 in the morning in Val-d'Or, I have a hunch isn't an easy challenge either. So we have to cut back to a balance where we have faith in our police officers that are called upon to do very difficult work in our society.
Geoff Kelley, Native Affairs Minister here in Quebec, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Our doors are open for you anytime. You want to come back here and talk more about this? We will gladly.